Everyone in the small Montana town thought they knew exactly who Nathan Carter was. To them, he was nothing more than a struggling mechanic, a tired widower covered in grease working long hours in a run-down garage just to keep the lights on and food on the table for his 12-year-old daughter Lily. Every morning they saw the same man wearing faded work boots and oil-stained gloves, crawling beneath broken pickup trucks while customers complained about repair bills he could barely collect. They saw the cracked roof above his shop, the rusted tools hanging on the walls, and the stack of unpaid invoices hidden beneath the counter. What they didn't see was the pain he carried every day since losing his wife Emily. What they didn't see was the promise he made at her hospital bedside years ago. And what they definitely didn't see was the secret hidden behind a locked steel door at the back of his workshop. Then everything changed the day Sterling Aerospace arrived in town. A fleet of black SUVs rolled down the main road, bringing wealthy investors, corporate executives, and their stunning CEO, Victoria Sterling. Their company planned to build a private aviation testing facility worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and nearly every landowner in town eagerly accepted their offers. Nearly everyone except Nathan Carter. His small property sat directly in the middle of the expansion zone, and the corporation expected him to surrender it without a fight. After all, why wouldn't a poor mechanic accept millions of dollars? But Nathan refused. Once, twice, 3 times. The more money they offered, the more determined he became. Soon whispers spread across town. People laughed behind his back. Some called him stubborn. Others called him foolish. During a public meeting, one executive openly mocked his garage, describing it as a worthless junkyard that should have been demolished years ago. Laughter filled the room. Even Victoria stood silently as Nathan was humiliated in front of the entire town. Yet the mechanic never raised his voice. He never defended himself. He simply looked at them and said something that made the room fall silent for a brief moment. "What's inside that workshop is worth more than everything you're trying to build." The laughter returned immediately. Nobody believed him. Nobody cared, because all they saw was a broken man clinging to a broken dream. But late at night, while the town slept and the executives celebrated future profits, strange sounds echoed from Nathan's property. The distant whine of turbines, the metallic hum of machinery, the unmistakable vibration of rotating blades. For years, Nathan had been living 2 lives. One as a mechanic the world ignored, the other as a brilliant engineer working in complete secrecy. And behind that locked steel door stood the reason he had sacrificed everything. Not a pile of scrap metal, not a hobby project, but a revolutionary aircraft that the biggest aviation companies on Earth had failed to create. The day those doors finally opened, the people who mocked him would discover that the man they dismissed as a poor, single father had been quietly building the future. And when the helicopter's engine roared to life for the first time, every person who had ever underestimated Nathan Carter was about to realize just how expensive that mistake would become. The sound of breaking glass shattered the cold Montana morning before the sun had even cleared the distant mountains. Nathan Carter dropped the wrench in his hand and rushed outside his garage, only to find the front window of his office smashed into hundreds of glittering fragments across the frozen ground. For a brief moment, he simply stood there, staring. The wind howled through the broken frame, carrying with it the laughter of a group of teenage boys disappearing down the road in a pickup truck. One of them leaned out of the passenger window and shouted, "Maybe if your garage wasn't such a dump, people would actually respect you." More laughter followed before the truck vanished around the corner. Nathan didn't chase them. He didn't yell. He didn't call the police. He simply bent down and began picking up the shattered pieces one by one. His hands moved carefully despite the freezing temperature, but his expression remained empty. This wasn't the first insult. It wasn't even the worst. For years, humiliation had become part of his daily routine. Every cracked joke, every dismissive glance, every whispered comment when he walked into town, he endured them all in silence. Behind him, the office door creaked open. Lily stood there wearing her oversized winter coat, her school backpack hanging loosely from one shoulder. She looked at the broken window and then at her father. "Dad," she asked softly. Nathan forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything's okay, sweetheart." Lily looked unconvinced. At 12 years old, she had already learned how to recognize the difference between a real smile and one that existed only to protect someone else. "Those boys again?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Lily knew it. He knew it. The entire town knew it. Nathan Carter had become the easiest target in Montana. Some people pitied him. Others mocked him openly. Most simply ignored him. To them, he was a cautionary tale. A man whose life had fallen apart and never recovered. A man who once had potential but now spent his days crawling beneath rusted trucks for customers who constantly demanded discounts. By mid-morning, the garage was busy. Engines roared. Tools clanged. Customers came and went. Yet respect never entered with them. Around noon, an expensive black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Nathan immediately recognized the vehicle. It belonged to Carl Whitmore, one of the wealthiest ranch owners in the county. Carl stepped out wearing a tailored coat that probably cost more than Nathan earned in a month. "My engine's making a noise," Carl said. Nathan wiped his hands and opened the hood. After only a few minutes, he identified the problem. "Loose timing belt. Shouldn't take more than 2 hours." Carl folded his arms. "How much?" Nathan quoted a fair price. Carl laughed. Actually laughed. "You're charging that much." Nathan remained calm. "That's the cost of the repair." Carl glanced around the garage with obvious disgust. "For this place." Several customers nearby chuckled. Nathan felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Carl continued. "You know, Nate, if you'd spent less time playing inventor and more time running a real business, maybe you wouldn't be fixing junk cars for a living." More laughter followed. Nathan lowered his gaze and returned to work. Arguing wouldn't change anything. It never did. But as Carl walked away, he missed the brief flash of pain that crossed Nathan's face, because the words hit closer than he realized. Years ago, Nathan had been something very different. Before the hospital bills, before the funeral, before Emily's death, hollowed out everything he had built. There had been a time when aerospace companies fought to recruit him. A time when engineers twice his age listened carefully when he entered a room. A time when his designs were considered groundbreaking. But those days felt like another lifetime. The memory returned unexpectedly that afternoon when he found an old photograph hidden inside a drawer while searching for paperwork. Emily stood beside him in the picture, smiling beneath the summer sun. Nathan stared at the image for several seconds. His fingers traced her face. 7 years had passed since cancer stole her away. Yet some mornings the loss still felt fresh enough to stop his breathing. He remembered the hospital room, the machines, the fear, the promise. Most of all, he remembered Emily taking his hand during her final days. "Promise me something," she had whispered. Nathan had nodded through tears. "Anything. Don't bury yourself with me." He had tried. God knew he had tried, but grief had a way of changing people. The memory was interrupted by the ringing of the office phone. Nathan quickly set the photograph aside and answered. It was the bank. Again. Another reminder about overdue payments. Another polite warning wrapped inside professional language. By the time the call ended, his shoulders felt heavier than before. Across the room, Lily sat quietly doing homework after school. She pretended not to hear the conversation. Nathan pretended not to notice her pretending. That evening, after closing time, father and daughter drove home in an aging pickup truck whose heater worked only when it felt generous. Their house sat on the edge of town, small and weathered but clean. During dinner, Lily spoke excitedly about a science project she was preparing for school. Nathan listened carefully, asking questions, encouraging her ideas. For those 30 minutes, the weight of the world disappeared. But after Lily went to bed, reality returned. Nathan sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills. Mortgage notices, utility statements, insurance demands, numbers that seemed to grow larger every month. He rubbed his eyes and stared at the stack. Any rational person would have surrendered years ago. Yet somehow he kept going. Eventually he stood, grabbed a worn leather jacket, and stepped outside into the darkness. The cold night air bit against his skin as he crossed the property toward a large structure hidden behind the garage. Most people assumed it was nothing more than an old storage building. They couldn't have been more wrong. Nathan unlocked 3 separate security locks before finally opening the steel door. The interior remained hidden in darkness until he flipped a switch. Then, the room came alive. Metal gleamed beneath fluorescent lights. Engineering blueprints covered entire walls. Specialized tools lined custom workbenches. Half-assembled mechanical systems rested on reinforced supports. And at the center of everything stood the machine that had consumed years of his life. The unfinished helicopter towered above him like a sleeping giant. Nathan walked toward it slowly. His fingers brushed against the aircraft's frame. Every panel, every rotor component, every bolt carried a story. Thousands of nights, countless sacrifices, dreams buried beneath exhaustion. Most men spent their evenings resting after work. Nathan spent his building a future nobody believed could exist. He climbed onto a maintenance platform and resumed working. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Outside, snow began falling. Inside, sparks erupted as welding equipment illuminated the darkness. His movements remained precise despite the fatigue. Somewhere beyond the walls, the town slept peacefully, unaware that one of the most important engineering breakthroughs of the century might be taking shape inside a forgotten mechanic's workshop. At nearly 2 in the morning, Nathan finally stopped. He climbed down from the platform and stared at the helicopter in silence. For a moment, uncertainty crept into his thoughts. What if everyone was right? What if this was nothing more than an impossible dream? What if he had sacrificed years chasing something that would never work? Then his eyes landed on a small photograph taped beside the workbench. Emily, smiling exactly as she had years ago. Beneath the picture was a handwritten note in her own handwriting. 3 simple words. Keep going, Nathan. He closed his eyes briefly. The doubt disappeared. Tomorrow the town would laugh again. Customers would complain. Bills would arrive. Strangers would look down on him. But none of them knew what he was building. None of them knew what was coming. And none of them could imagine that the man they considered a failure was only months away from changing everything. The first offer arrived on a Monday morning, and by sunset, the entire town was talking about it. Nathan Carter was underneath a rusted Ford pickup, replacing a transmission, when a convoy of polished black SUVs rolled into the gravel parking lot outside his garage. Every mechanic in town recognized expensive vehicles when they saw them, but these were different. Their windows were dark enough to hide faces, their paint reflected the Montana sky like mirrors, and their presence alone seemed completely out of place among the oil stains and worn-out machinery scattered around Nathan's workshop. Customers stopped talking. Tools fell silent. Even the engines seemed quieter as 3 men in tailored suits stepped out and approached him. Nathan slid out from beneath the truck, wiping grease from his hands onto an old rag. The tallest man extended a business card. Sterling Aerospace. Nathan glanced at the logo, then at the man. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Mr. Carter," the man replied with a professional smile. "We'd like to discuss purchasing your property." Nathan's expression didn't change. He had heard rumors for weeks. Everyone had. Sterling Aerospace had been buying land across the county at astonishing prices. Farmers were becoming millionaires overnight. Ranch owners were retiring early. Small business owners who had struggled for decades suddenly found themselves holding checks larger than they had ever imagined. The company wanted to build a private aviation testing complex stretching across thousands of acres, and nearly everyone was eager to sell. Nearly everyone except Nathan. "Not interested," he replied before returning to the truck. The representative blinked. "You haven't even heard the offer." "I don't need to." The man exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Mr. Carter, we're prepared to offer $2 million." The garage went silent, completely silent. A socket wrench slipped from someone's hand and hit the floor with a loud metallic clang. $2 million. For a property that most locals considered barely worth a fraction of that amount. Every customer inside the garage stared at Nathan, waiting for his reaction. But Nathan simply tightened another bolt beneath the truck. "No." The word landed like a hammer. Nobody understood. The representatives certainly didn't. One of them actually laughed, convinced he must have misheard. "Excuse me?" Nathan rolled out from under the vehicle and looked directly at him. "I said no." The representatives left shortly afterward, visibly confused. By lunchtime, news of the rejection had spread across town. By dinner, it had become the only thing anyone wanted to discuss. At Miller's Diner, ranchers shook their heads in disbelief. At the gas station, customers argued about whether Nathan had lost his mind. At the local hardware store, people openly mocked him. $2 million for that dump," one man said. "I'd sell my own mother for half that." Laughter followed. The story grew stranger with every retelling. Some claimed Nathan was secretly in debt and negotiating for more money. Others insisted he had suffered a nervous breakdown years ago after Emily died and was no longer thinking rationally. Nobody considered the possibility that he had a legitimate reason. Because in their minds, Nathan Carter was no longer the brilliant engineer he had once been. He was simply the town mechanic, a man struggling to survive. A man who should have been grateful for any opportunity life offered him. 3 days later, Sterling Aerospace returned. This time, they brought a bigger offer. $3 million. Nathan rejected it in less than 30 seconds. The following week, they increased the number to $5 million. Again, he refused. That's when curiosity transformed into obsession. The town could no longer ignore the mystery. Why would a man who struggled to pay bills reject enough money to change his life forever? Why would someone living paycheck to paycheck walk away from wealth most people could only dream about? Even Lily couldn't fully understand. One evening, while helping wash dishes after dinner, she finally asked the question everyone else was asking. "Dad." Nathan looked up from the sink. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Why won't you sell?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared through the kitchen window toward the darkness beyond the backyard. Somewhere out there stood the workshop. Somewhere inside that workshop stood the answer. "Because some things are worth more than money," he finally said. Lily nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. Neither was anyone else. But while the town speculated, someone far more dangerous had begun asking the same questions. Victoria Sterling stood inside her corporate office overlooking the Seattle skyline as she reviewed another report detailing Nathan's refusal. She was accustomed to obstacles. She had built Sterling Aerospace into one of the fastest-growing aviation companies in America by overcoming obstacles. But Nathan Carter made no sense. The financial analysts couldn't explain him. The negotiators couldn't explain him. The lawyers couldn't explain him. Every logical reason pointed toward selling, yet he refused. "Who is this guy?" she finally asked. Brandon Pierce leaned back in his chair. "A mechanic." Victoria tossed the report onto the desk. "No, a mechanic doesn't reject $5 million. Brandon shrugged. "Maybe he's stupid." But Victoria wasn't convinced. Over the years, she had learned something valuable about people. Truly foolish individuals rarely created problems. Nathan Carter had become a very expensive problem, which meant there had to be something she was missing. "I want everything we can find on him," she said. Brandon frowned. "Everything?" "School records, employment history, financial records, past business dealings, family connections, everything." Within 48 hours, investigators began digging into Nathan's past. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Years earlier, Nathan Carter had worked for one of the country's most advanced aerospace research programs. He had been listed on patents. Internal evaluations described him as exceptionally gifted. Several former colleagues referred to him as a visionary. One report even described him as a once-in-a-generation engineering talent. Victoria stared at the files in disbelief. None of it matched the image of the exhausted mechanic she had seen standing inside that run-down garage. "Why would someone like this disappear?" she asked. Nobody had an answer. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Around 7 years earlier, Nathan had abruptly resigned from the industry. Shortly afterward, his wife was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Financial records showed massive medical expenses, property sales, retirement accounts drained completely, every asset liquidated. Then silence, as though one life had ended and another had begun. Victoria found herself studying Nathan's photograph longer than she intended. There was something unusual about his eyes. Not weakness, not defeat. Something else. Something hidden. A week later, she decided to visit Montana personally. The town welcomed her like royalty. Business owners lined the streets. Local officials organized dinners and presentations. Everyone wanted to impress the powerful CEO. Everyone except Nathan. Victoria found him exactly where she expected inside the garage, covered in grease, repairing a battered truck. "Mr. Carter," she said. Nathan barely looked up. "Miss Sterling, I'd like to talk." "Then talk." Victoria glanced around. "Privately." Nathan continued working. "Whatever you have to say can be said here." The refusal irritated her more than she expected. Most people practically tripped over themselves when speaking to billion-dollar executives. Nathan didn't seem impressed at all. $5 million is a life-changing amount of money," Victoria said. Nathan tightened a bolt. "Maybe. Then why refuse?" For the first time, he stopped working. The garage became silent. Every mechanic, customer and employee seemed to stop breathing. Nathan slowly stood and faced her. His expression remained calm. "Because what I'm building isn't finished yet." Victoria frowned. "Building?" Nathan immediately returned to work. Conversation over. But the words echoed in her mind long after she left. That night, curiosity got the better of her. She parked near the property and watched from a distance. Hours passed. The garage closed. Lights went out. The town slept. Then shortly after midnight, something happened. A faint glow appeared behind the main workshop. Victoria watched as Nathan disappeared into a separate structure hidden behind the garage. Minutes later, unusual sounds drifted across the darkness. Metallic vibrations. Machinery. The low hum of something powerful. Not automotive, not industrial. Something else. Something she couldn't identify. Then came the strangest sound of all. A rhythmic pulse. Mechanical. Rotational. Almost like blades. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She remained there for nearly an hour, listening. The sounds continued deep into the night. Whatever Nathan was doing, it wasn't repairing trucks. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Neither could the town. Rumors were spreading faster than ever. Some claimed Nathan was hiding gold. Others believed he had inherited secret wealth. A few suggested he was building something illegal. Nobody knew the truth. But for the first time, people stopped laughing. Curiosity had replaced mockery. The mystery was becoming impossible to ignore. And inside the locked workshop beneath bright fluorescent lights and surrounded by thousands of engineering notes, Nathan Carter stood before the unfinished helicopter and examined a newly installed component. After years of failure, sacrifice, and relentless determination, he was closer than ever before. He looked toward the photograph of Emily hanging on the wall. Then he looked at the aircraft. Outside, the world believed he was protecting a piece of land. They believed he was fighting over money. They believed he was being stubborn. None of them understood that the property itself had never mattered. The garage had never mattered. The money had never mattered. The real secret was sitting only a few feet away from him. A secret capable of changing his life, changing the aviation industry, and changing the way the entire world saw Nathan Carter forever. But for now, the truth remained locked behind steel doors hidden from everyone, including the powerful CEO, who was becoming increasingly determined to uncover what the mechanic was hiding. Victoria Sterling had spent her entire career around extraordinary machines. She had toured military air bases, walked through billion-dollar research facilities, inspected prototype aircraft worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and negotiated contracts with some of the most brilliant engineers in the world. Very little surprised her anymore. Yet as she sat alone in her hotel room that night, staring through the window at the distant lights of the Montana town below, she couldn't stop thinking about Nathan Carter. The mystery had become personal. Every piece of evidence contradicted the image everyone had of him. A struggling mechanic didn't possess a background filled with aerospace patents. A man barely paying his bills didn't reject $5 million without hesitation. And a broken widower certainly didn't spend every night hidden inside a locked workshop producing sounds that resembled advanced machinery. Somewhere in the puzzle, there was a missing piece. The next afternoon, Victoria received it from the most unexpected source imaginable. Lily Carter. School had ended early because of an approaching snowstorm, and Victoria happened to stop at a local cafe while reviewing land acquisition reports. As fate would have it, Lily was there with several classmates. Victoria recognized her immediately from the investigation files. She wasn't planning to approach the girl, but when Lily accidentally dropped a stack of books while leaving, Victoria instinctively helped gather them. "Thank you," Lily said politely. Victoria smiled. "You're Lily Carter, right?" The girl nodded. "You know my dad?" Victoria hesitated. "Something like that." Lily seemed to study her for a moment before speaking again. "You're the lady trying to buy our land." The directness caught Victoria off guard. "I suppose I am." Lily's expression remained calm. "Dad won't sell." Victoria almost laughed. "I've noticed." There was an awkward silence. Then Lily said something that sent a chill through her. "Because he promised Mom he would finish it." Victoria froze. "Finish what?" Lily immediately realized she had said too much. Her eyes widened. "I should go." Before Victoria could ask another question, the girl hurried away into the falling snow. "Finish it." The words echoed endlessly in Victoria's mind. That evening, she drove back toward Nathan's property, parking near the road once again. Snow drifted across the landscape under the pale moonlight. The town was quiet, almost peaceful. Then shortly after midnight, the familiar glow appeared behind the garage. Victoria watched Nathan disappear into the hidden building. The strange mechanical sounds followed minutes later. This time, she moved closer. Careful, silent, determined. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she approached the rear of the property. She wasn't entirely sure what she expected to find. Perhaps advanced machinery. Perhaps some unfinished invention. Perhaps evidence explaining why Nathan believed his land was worth more than millions. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. A sudden metallic noise echoed from inside the workshop. Then another. Victoria stepped closer to a side window partially obscured by years of dust. The glass was too dirty to see clearly. She wiped away a section with her glove and froze. For several seconds she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Standing inside the workshop was not a machine, not a project, not some collection of spare parts. It was an aircraft, a full-sized helicopter. Victoria's pulse exploded. The enormous frame dominated the building. Its sleek body reflected the workshop lights. Rotor assemblies rested above the fuselage. Sophisticated engineering systems surrounded it on every side. Blueprints covered entire walls. Complex calculations filled whiteboards. Specialized equipment occupied every corner of the building. This wasn't a hobby. This wasn't an amateur project. This was the work of a genius. Victoria stared in absolute disbelief. Every assumption she had made about Nathan Carter collapsed in an instant. Suddenly, the late-night noises made sense. The rejected offers made sense. The locked doors made sense. Everything made sense. Yet a more shocking realization quickly followed. As someone who had spent years in aviation, Victoria recognized certain design elements immediately. The rotor system was unlike anything currently used in commercial aircraft. The stabilizing mechanisms appeared radically different. The fuel architecture seemed revolutionary. Even from a distance, she could see concepts that shouldn't exist outside advanced research facilities. Her heart began racing faster. Inside the workshop, Nathan continued working completely unaware he was being watched. He moved around the aircraft with practiced confidence, making adjustments, recording measurements, checking systems. Every action suggested thousands of hours of experience, thousands of hours of dedication. Victoria felt something she rarely experienced: respect. Genuine respect. The next morning, she drove directly to the garage before Nathan opened for business. Snow still covered the ground when she stepped inside. Nathan looked up from his workbench. Their eyes met. For the first time since meeting him, Victoria seemed uncertain. "I know," she said quietly. Nathan's expression didn't change. "Know what?" Victoria walked closer. "About the workshop." Silence filled the garage. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Finally, Nathan set down his tools. "You shouldn't have been there." "What is it?" Victoria asked. "A helicopter." Nathan studied her for several seconds. Then he surprised her. "Come with me." Victoria followed him outside. Together, they crossed the snow-covered property toward the hidden building. Nathan unlocked the steel door. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he slowly pushed it open. Victoria had already seen part of what lay inside, but now, standing directly before it, the reality was overwhelming. The aircraft seemed even larger than before, more impressive, more impossible. Sunlight filtered through high windows, illuminating thousands of details hidden during the night. The helicopter's frame stretched across the workshop like something from the future. Complex rotor assemblies towered overhead. Custom-engineered components occupied every visible surface. Detailed diagrams lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Entire sections of engineering theory had been rewritten by hand. Victoria walked forward slowly, unable to hide her amazement. "My God," she whispered. Nathan remained silent. She approached the fuselage and ran her fingers along the smooth metal surface. "You built this?" Nathan nodded. "Most of it?" "Alone." Another nod. Victoria looked around the workshop. Years of work surrounded her. Countless sacrifices. Endless determination. Suddenly she noticed photographs pinned to one wall, hundreds of them. Nathan, Emily, Lily, progress pictures documenting every stage of construction. She moved closer. The oldest photos showed little more than scattered components and rough sketches. The newer ones revealed gradual transformation, piece by piece, year after year. While the world believed Nathan was repairing trucks, he had quietly been building an aircraft that could redefine aviation. "Why?" she asked. Nathan looked toward a framed photograph of Emily hanging above the workbench. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice finally broke the silence. "Because everyone else gave up." Victoria turned toward him. Nathan walked slowly around the helicopter. "The concept started years ago, before Emily got sick, before everything changed." He touched one of the rotor assemblies. Several companies explored the technology, government contractors too. The potential was enormous: better stability, lower fuel consumption, safer flight characteristics. But development was expensive. Progress was slow. His eyes darkened. Investors got impatient. Victoria understood exactly what he meant. She had witnessed it herself countless times. Projects were abandoned every year because profits weren't immediate enough. "So they canceled it?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "They walked away. And you didn't." Nathan looked at the helicopter. "No." Another silence followed. Victoria slowly realized what she was seeing. This wasn't simply an unfinished aircraft. It was the physical embodiment of 7 years of grief. 7 years of sacrifice. 7 years of refusing to surrender. Every late-night welding session, every missed meal, every insult endured by the town, every dollar saved. Everything had led to this moment. Then Nathan walked toward a workbench and picked up a worn notebook. He handed it to Victoria. She opened it carefully. Her breath caught immediately. The pages contained advanced engineering calculations unlike anything she had ever seen. Design modifications, performance projections, stability algorithms, fuel optimization models. The deeper she read, the more stunned she became. Finally, she looked up. "Nathan." Her voice trembled slightly. "Do you realize what this is?" Nathan's answer was simple. "Yes." Victoria stared at him. The mechanic everyone mocked. The widower everyone pitied. The father everyone underestimated. Hidden behind a forgotten garage in a small Montana town stood a machine capable of changing the future of flight. And suddenly she understood why $5 million had meant nothing to him. Because what stood before them was worth infinitely more. Not just financially, emotionally, personally, historically. The helicopter wasn't merely an invention. It was a promise, a legacy, a dream that refused to die. And as Victoria looked at the aircraft one final time, she realized something else. If this machine worked, truly worked, then every person who had laughed at Nathan Carter was about to witness one of the greatest reversals of fortune they had ever seen. The mechanic they mocked was not a failure. He was a visionary. And very soon, the entire world would find out. 3 weeks later, the entire world seemed to be watching a place it had never heard of before. News helicopters circled above the Montana Valley. Broadcast trucks lined the roads leading into town. Aviation journalists, engineers, investors, military consultants, and corporate executives arrived from every corner of the country. Hotels within 100 miles were fully booked. The small town that had once laughed at Nathan Carter now struggled to contain the crowds gathering to witness what many experts were calling the most anticipated private aircraft demonstration in decades. Yet despite the attention, Nathan remained exactly the same. On the morning of the test flight, he arrived at the workshop wearing the same worn boots, the same faded jacket, and the same calm expression he had worn for years. The difference was that now, when people looked at him, they no longer saw a failed mechanic. They saw a man carrying the weight of a dream that was about to either soar into history or crash in front of the entire world. As he stepped into the hangar, he paused beside Emily's photograph. The image had faded slightly over the years, but her smile remained unchanged. Nathan stared at it for a long moment. "We're almost there," he whispered softly. "Just one more step." Then he walked toward the aircraft. Outside, hundreds of spectators filled the designated viewing area. Among them stood many of the same people who had once mocked him. Carl Whitmore was there. The customers who laughed at his garage were there. The townspeople who called him foolish were there. Even the teenagers who had broken his office window months earlier stood quietly near the back of the crowd. None of them spoke much anymore. Shame had replaced arrogance. They all understood now how wrong they had been. Victoria Sterling stood near the runway watching Nathan prepare for the flight. Over the past weeks, her admiration for him had grown into something deeper than professional respect. She had spent years surrounded by successful people, but Nathan was different. He had achieved something extraordinary without recognition, without support, and without abandoning the people he loved. In a world obsessed with profit and prestige, he had remained faithful to a promise. That was far rarer than genius. The final inspection began. Engineers reviewed every system. Independent experts verified the data. Every measurement confirmed the same astonishing conclusion. Nathan's design worked. Not theoretically, not on paper. In reality. The revolutionary rotor stabilization system performed beyond expectations. Fuel efficiency numbers exceeded projections. Safety margins surpassed existing industry standards. Several engineers privately admitted they still couldn't fully understand how he had achieved it. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Nathan climbed into the cockpit. Silence spread across the valley. Cameras focused. Reporters stopped speaking. Thousands of eyes fixed on the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Nathan rested his hand on the controls. For a brief second, memories flooded his mind. Emily laughing on a summer afternoon, Lily taking her first steps, hospital corridors, sleepless nights, unpaid bills, empty bank accounts, years of loneliness, years of doubt, years of hearing people tell him he had failed. And through all of it, one promise remained. Don't let your dreams die with me. Nathan closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Then he started the engine. The rotor blades began turning, slowly at first, then faster. The sound echoed across the valley. Dust swirled, grass bent beneath the growing force. The helicopter trembled slightly before becoming perfectly steady. Engineers exchanged stunned glances. The stability was unlike anything they had ever seen. Seconds later, the aircraft lifted from the ground, smoothly, effortlessly, gracefully. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Nathan guided the helicopter higher into the sky. Every maneuver was precise, every movement controlled. Every data point arriving from the aircraft exceeded expectations. Experts stared at their monitors in disbelief. Some removed their glasses and checked the numbers again. Others simply shook their heads. A problem that had frustrated billion-dollar corporations for decades had been solved by a widowed mechanic working alone in a forgotten workshop. Tears formed in Victoria's eyes as she watched the aircraft glide across the Montana sky. Not because of the engineering achievement, not because of the money it would generate, but because she knew what the flight truly represented. It wasn't the victory of an inventor. It was the victory of a husband who refused to give up on a promise. When the helicopter finally landed, the crowd erupted. Applause thundered across the valley. People rose to their feet. Reporters rushed forward. Investors immediately began discussing offers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But Nathan barely noticed any of it. His attention was focused on one person, Lily. She ran toward him the moment he stepped out of the cockpit. Nathan knelt as she threw her arms around him. Neither spoke for several seconds. Neither needed to. Then Lily looked up at him through tears. "You did it, Dad." Nathan smiled. A real smile. The kind he hadn't worn in years. "No," he said gently. "We did it." Later that evening, after the crowds departed and the reporters packed away their cameras, the valley finally became quiet again. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Nathan stood alone beside the helicopter. The aircraft now carried a name painted across its side in elegant lettering. Emily 1. He reached out and touched the name softly. Footsteps approached behind him. Victoria stopped a few feet away. "They're calling it one of the greatest breakthroughs in modern aviation," she said. Nathan nodded. "Maybe." Victoria smiled. "You don't seem very excited about becoming famous." Nathan looked toward the horizon. That was never the goal. She followed his gaze. Then what was... Nathan remained silent for a moment. Then he looked at the name on the aircraft. Emily 1. The answer was there for anyone willing to see it. Victoria understood immediately. She said nothing more. Some victories were too personal for words. As darkness slowly settled over the valley, Lily joined her father beside the helicopter. Together they stood in silence, watching the final light disappear beyond the mountains. For the first time in many years, Nathan felt something he thought he had lost forever. Peace. The grief would never completely disappear. Emily would always be missing. Some wounds never truly heal. But standing there with Lily beside him and the completed aircraft before him, Nathan finally understood something important. Moving forward did not mean leaving someone behind. Keeping a promise did not mean living in the past. Love could survive loss. Dreams could survive heartbreak. And sometimes the people the world dismisses as failures are simply heroes whose story has not yet been revealed. High above the valley, the first stars began to appear. Nathan looked toward the sky and smiled softly. Somewhere in that quiet moment, he imagined Emily smiling back. And for the first time since she was gone, he no longer felt alone.